Paramahamsa Parivrajagacharya Stota Shatashishimat His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajagacharya Stota Shatashishimat His Divine Grace Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Shri Rupa Shri Sanatana Bhatta Ragana Shri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Das Ragana Shad Goswami Prabhu Ki Jai Prem Sako Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shamakun Radhakun Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Shri Vrindavanam Ki Jai Mayapur Navadvitam Ki Jai Gangamai Ki Jai Jamunamai Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Yugadharma Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai Brihat Madanga Ki Jai Samaveta Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai Gaura Premanandi. Our gloriously assembled devotees, our gloriously assembled devotees, our gloriously assembled devotees, our glorious lotus feet of Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga, our glorious of Srila Prabhupada. Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 4, Text 3. Bhagavan Swaatmamayaya Katim Tam Avalokya Saha Sarasvatim Upasprishya Vrikshamulam Upavishat Bhagavan Swatmamayaya Katim Tam Avalokya Saha Sarasvatim Upasprishya Vrikshamulam Upavishat Bhagavan Swatmamayaya Katim Tam Avalokya Saha Sarasvatim Upasprishya Vrikshamulam Upavishat Bhagavan Swatmamayaya Katim Tam Avalokya Saha Sarasvatim Upasprishya Vrikshamulam Upavishat. Please chant. Okay. Word for word. Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead. Swa'atmamayaya, by his internal potency. Gitim, the end. Tam, that. Avalokya, foreseeing. Saha, he, Krishna. Sarasvatim, the river Sarasvati. Upasprishya, after sipping water. Vrikshamulam, at the foot of a tree. Upavishat, sat down. No, thank you. The personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna, after foreseeing the end of his family by his internal potency, went to the bank of the river Sarasvati, sipped water, and sat down underneath a tree. Please repeat. The personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna, after foreseeing the end of his family by his internal potency, went to the bank of the river Sarasvati, sipped water, and sat down underneath a tree. Purport. All the above mentioned activities of the Yadus and Bojas were executed by the internal potency of the Lord because he wanted them to be dispatched to their respective abodes after he had finished his mission of descent. They were all his sons and grandsons and were given complete protection by the paternal affection of the Lord. How they could be vanquished in the presence of the Lord is answered in this verse. Everything was done by the Lord himself. Swatmamayaya. The Lord's family members were either incarnations of his plenary expansions or demigods from the heavenly planets. And thus before his departure he separated them by his internal potency. Before being dispatched to their respective abodes, they were sent to the holy place of Prabhas, where they performed pious activities and took food and drink to their heart's content. It was then arranged for them to be sent back to their abodes, so that others could see that the powerful Yadu dynasty was no longer in the world. In the previous verse, the word anugyata, indicating that the whole sequence of events was arranged by the Lord, is significant. These particular pastimes of the Lord are not a manifestation of his external energy or material nature. Such an exhibition of his internal potency is eternal, and therefore one should not conclude that the Yadus and Bojas died in a drunken state in an ordinary fratricidal war. Sri Jiva Goswami comments on these incidents as magical performances. Om Jnana Timandasya Gyananjana Shalakoya Chakshu Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkest ignorance. My spiritual master opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisances unto his lotus feet. Bhagavan Swatmamayaya Katim Tam Avalokya Saha Sarasvatim Upas Prishya Vriksha Mulamupavishat. The personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna, after foreseeing the end of his family, by his internal potency, went to the bank of the river Sarasvati, sipped water, and sat down underneath a tree. So this is chapter 4 of the 3rd canto, entitled Vidura Approaches Maitreya. And I'm just going to read some translations so we get a flow of what the chapter is about. This is from text 1. Thereafter, all of them, the descendants of Vrishni and Bhoja, being permitted by the Brahmanas, partook of the remnants of prasad, and also drank liquor made of rice. By drinking, they all became delirious, and bereft of knowledge, they touched the cores of each other's heart with harsh words. As by the friction of bamboos destruction takes place, so also at sunset by the interaction of the faults of intoxication, all their minds became unbalanced and destruction took place. The personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna, after foreseeing the end of his family, by his internal potency, went to the bank of the river Sarasvati, sipped water, and sat down underneath a tree. The Lord is the vanquisher of the distresses of one who is surrendered unto him. Thus he who desired to destroy his family told me previously to go to Badrik Ashram. Yet in spite of my knowing his desire to destroy the dynasty, O Arindama Vidura, I followed him because it was impossible for me to bear separation from the lotus feet of the Master. Thus following, I saw my patron and master, Lord Sri Krishna, sitting alone and deeply thinking, taking shelter on the bank of the river Sarasvati, although he is the shelter of the goddess of fortune. The Lord's body is blackish, but is eternal, full of bliss and knowledge, and very, very beautiful. His eyes are always peaceful, and they are reddish like the rising morning sun. I could immediately recognize him as the Supreme Personality of Godhead by his 4 hands, different symbolic representations, and yellow silk garments. The Lord was sitting, taking rest against a young banyan tree, with his right lotus foot on his left thigh. And although he had left all household comforts, he looked quite cheerful in that posture. At that time, after traveling in many parts of the world, Maitreya, a great devotee of the Lord, and a friend and well-wisher of the great sage Krishna Dvaipayana Vyas, reached that spot out of his own perfect accord. Maitreya Muni was greatly attached to him, the Lord, and he was listening in a pleasing attitude, with his shoulder lowered. With a smile and a particular glance upon me, having allowed me to rest, the Lord spoke as follows. So this is Uddhava speaking. Uddhava speaking to Vidura about the end of the Yadu dynasty and the actions of Krishna during this particular time. And this is coming up to the past time when actually Krishna leaves this planet to go back to his own abode. And it's very interesting how he leaves this planet. He gets shot in the foot by an arrow. You would think normally, like, even an ordinary human can survive this. But it's Krishna's internal potency. We know that Krishna never dies, but somehow it was his pastime. So, before I start speaking, I want to read something that's actually related to this purport, and you might not understand how it's related, but I'll connect it. This is a dream that someone had, a non-devotee and some young lady. She had a dream of Queen Kunti. And so this happened from, this is a story from a devotee named Leela Madhava Prabhu. He says, I was distributing books on a sidewalk at an intersection in Barcelona, Spain. Every day I would try to stop the same young lady, but she would ignore me. One day I walked with her a few meters, pleading with her in a friendly way. Come on, just take at least one book. Pointing to the teachings of Queen Kunti I was holding, I said, Here, please take the teachings of the Queen. But to no avail, she wouldn't stop. And this happened every day. He would approach her and she wouldn't stop. However, the next day, when I saw her, she humbly approached me and asked, Can I buy the teachings of Queen Kunti? Surprised, I replied, How did you know the name of the Queen? I clearly remembered not having mentioned Queen Kunti's name to her, but saying only, Please take the teachings of the Queen. But here she was, asking explicitly for the teachings of Queen Kunti. She replied, Actually, I had a dream of this Queen Kunti last night. She told me, Go buy my book from that young man. The young lady gave such a nice donation that I also handed her a Bhagavad Gita. When she saw it, she exclaimed, Wow, the Bhagavad Gita, I can't believe it. My boyfriend has been telling me about this book for a whole year. Then I showed her all the books I had. She gave even more Lakshmi and ended up buying my entire selection. Yeah. And the conclusion of this devotee was that book distribution is mystical. So, Srila Jiva Goswami in this purport, Prabhupada is saying that he comments on these incidents as magical performances. That in the previous verse, the word anugyata, indicating that the whole sequence of events was arranged by the Lord, is significant. These particular pastimes of the Lord are not a manifestation of his external energy or material nature. So this whole Krishna consciousness movement is, Prabhupada says, is an incarnation of Krishna. ISKCON is an incarnation of Krishna. And this Sankirtan movement, going out in the streets and chanting and engaging others in devotional service, it's actually directed by Krishna's internal potency. It's a Yogamaya potency. It's not an external affair. And we see these things happen, like I just read about this young lady dreaming of Queen Kunti. These things happen on a regular basis. Anyone who actually goes out and tries to spread Krishna consciousness, he'll be astounded by the miracles that actually happen right before our eyes. And this has happened to me also a few times when I had a book table. At least 2 or 3 times, and they were all women actually, like maybe in their 30s or 40s. They would come up to the table and they would be like in shock almost, and I was wondering what was going on with them. And they would point to a picture of Prabhupada and they would say, "Who is this?" And I'd say, "Yeah, this is our spiritual master. He translated these books." And they said that they dreamed of him. And like on one occasion, one lady said, "He told me to like buy this book, Bhagavad Gita." Yeah, I'm not joking. That actually happened at least 2 or 3 times. And just the fact that I have this book in my hand, the Srimad Bhagavatam, is actually a miracle. We're in 2022. This temple was open in the 70s. 69, okay. And previous to that, let's just say previous to even Prabhupada coming to America, if you walk down the street, Watsika Avenue, there's no Krishna consciousness going on, just a material street, right? And then you just fast forward 70 years later, and we have established a temple with Krishna himself on the altar and dedicated devotees worshipping Krishna. So this Bhagavatam wasn't always here, and it wasn't always in English. And it's a whole arrangement by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He comes as himself. He comes in different incarnations. He comes as the spiritual master and the Guru Parampara. And it's all arranged so that we can have the Bhagavatam right in front of us, so that we can chant Hare Krishna. All these pastimes that we're reading, Krishna is on the planet, performing activities, different devotees and their pastimes in the Bhagavatam. It's all arranged so that one day Vyasadeva can come and write it. First of all, Parikshit Maharaj can speak it to, or Shukadeva Goswami can speak it to Parikshit Maharaj, and Vyasadeva writes it down in Devanagari. And then eventually, Lord Chaitanya comes, and he tells the 6 Goswamis to write literature. And even after the departure of Lord Chaitanya, somehow or another, the material energy, somehow the external energy covered those pastimes for some time, until really Bhaktivinoda Thakur reestablished the supremacy of the Vaishnava culture. And then his son, the Ray of Vishnu, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, really taking up the mission of his father and wanting to spread Krishna consciousness all over the world. Actually, this was the dream of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And on Bhaktivinoda Thakur, the mother, and his wife, the mother of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, when she was on her deathbed about to leave her body, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was there, Bimala Prasad at the time, and she was pleading with him that your father actually wanted this Krishna consciousness movement spread all over the planet, and we haven't seen that manifest, but please take this mission very seriously. So he took that to heart from his father and his mother as an instruction. And so he was the lion preacher. He established mats all over India, and he had to really fight and battle opposing elements such as Mayavad, Sahajiyism. If you can imagine, at that time, he was basically the sole warrior, the only one basically upholding the Vaishnava Dharma, Vaishnava principles, and trying to spread them and establish them as a solid fact. If you can imagine going to a huge university like UCLA or USC, where billions of dollars are invested with university professors and textbooks that are already established that this is the knowledge that the students are supposed to learn. Students are coming and learning from these teachers and these textbooks and investing their life's energy to learn these. If you can imagine yourself as one person going to USC and completely turning it and proving the university textbooks as wrong and having fault, and the university professors not knowing what they're talking about, and persuading the whole student body to believe in what you have to say, that is kind of comparing what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur did in establishing Vaishnavism as the supreme. So Bhaktisiddhanta comes, and he is pleading for his disciples to spread the Krishna consciousness movement around the world, not only in India. In India was to create a foundation. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur created a foundation. Without that, Prabhupada would have had much more work to do. So he created the foundation in India, pleading for his disciples to bring it to the West. And a couple of his sannyasi disciples actually went to the West. They went to England without not so much success. They tried, so all glories to their service, but they came back, and it didn't satisfy Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. His expectations weren't fulfilled. So on a number of occasions, on one time in Navadvip Parikrama, Bhaktisiddhanta also established that for devotees to go around Navadvip around the time of Gauri Purnima. I think it just finished, or it's going on right now, Parikrama right now in Mayapur. But he actually established that for devotees to go every year. So this was, I think, the last, or one of the last parikramas that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was performing. And it was at Champahatta. It's a temple in Navadvip with Gaur Gadadhar deities. And this was the last place of the parikrama. It was the last day of the parikrama. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur himself was going to speak. So all his disciples were there, and many of the villagers were there. There were like thousands of people in the assembly. And also Abhayacharana Vinda was there, but he was in the back of the assembly, you know, in the crowd somewhere. Just another person in the crowd, seemingly. And a good friend of his, of Abhay's, was sitting in front of him, like to the right or left a little bit. And Bhaktisiddhanta was actually preaching, very fiery, telling his disciples that we have to preach in the English language. We have to spread Lord Chaitanya's movement all over the world. This was actually Lord Chaitanya's prediction, Lord Nityananda's prediction, but it hasn't gone to pass. We haven't seen it with our eyes yet. So please take this mission. And actually, there was one brahmachari there. He was considered a very successful brahmachari in the Gaudiya Math, and he was famous for actually converting whole villages. He would go to different villages and preach and make many disciples and bring them to a spiritual master, Bhaktisiddhanta, and they'd all become initiated, and he was very famous for this. So Bhaktisiddhanta turned to him and he said, "You can do it. You're a very successful brahmachari, and you're a very successful preacher. I have faith that you can go to the West and spread Lord Chaitanya's mission." And this brahmachari, very out of humility, and but he was a little bit nervous. He actually started crying a little bit and saying that if I go to the West, I think I'll fall down. I can't do this. But I know if I stay here in India, I can please you. I can keep preaching like I'm doing. I can keep helping you make disciples. But I can't leave. I can't live without your association. I have to be close to you. And so Bhaktisiddhanta just kind of patted him on the head or whatever and said, "Okay, it's okay. You just keep doing what you're doing." And then he turned to Srila Sridhar Maharaj, and said the same thing. And Sridhar Maharaj very humbly said, "It's not my nature. I'm more like a scholar, and I'm a little bit shy. I'm not my English. They won't really understand my English, my accent." And so Bhaktisiddhanta was like, "Okay." And then all of a sudden he raised his finger and he said, "Actually, first of all, before he does this, Abhay Charnavinda is in the audience. And like I said, a friend of his is sitting in front of him. And he notices, this friend of Abhay, notices that Bhaktisiddhanta somehow makes direct eye contact with someone right next to him. And at first he thought that Bhaktisiddhanta was looking at him, so he got a little bit nervous. But then he turned around and he saw Abhay Charnavinda sitting right behind him. And he noticed that Abhay's eyes were locked on the eyes of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And he said that it was the eye contact was so deep and so penetrating that you can almost cut it with a knife. And they were just looking at each other for quite a few moments. And then after this, Bhaktisiddhanta raised his hand. He said, "I actually make a prediction. I predict that my next disciple who goes over the ocean, however long in the future this may take, he'll bring back the whole world." And we know the history, that this was actually A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. When Prabhupada came in 1965, he first arrived in the Boston Harbor, and it was arranged that some Indian gentleman, he was not really a devotee, but he was doing it because his father wanted him to. He brought Abhay, or A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, into his house, and Srila Prabhupada would stay in his house for some time. And it says that it was Mr. Agarwal that he kind of just tolerated Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada struggled for quite some time. He realized, this was in Butler, Pennsylvania. he was trying to do some preaching there. He realized that this probably wasn't the place to spread a worldwide Krishna consciousness movement, some small town in Butler, Pennsylvania. And then he came to New York, and he was almost basically homeless. He was living on the Bowery, which is like Skid Row. If anybody knows what Skid Row is like in LA, it's really intense. You know, druggies everywhere. You'll see people just hanging out with like heroin needles hanging out of their arm, just laying on the sidewalk. And the police don't even don't interfere with anything. It's just kind of wild. So that's my understanding of what it was like where Prabhupada was living. And he had to deal with drug addicts and not so many receptive people. But eventually he got a small following, and this was in 1966. But if you fast forward 10 years later, huge Rath Yatra down the most important street in New York, with thousands of disciples shouting his name, chanting Srila Prabhupada's name. So Prabhupada actually, during this time, was translating what Vyasadeva wrote down in Devanagari, and was writing purports according to the six Goswamis, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, so many different acharyas, to bring us what we have today. So the point of me saying all that was just to try to illustrate how, like Jiva Goswami says in this purport, Prabhupada quotes, that these incidents are magical performances that Krishna sends down Shaktivesh avatars. He comes himself. He sends down different Nitya-siddha devotees to write literatures, and then eventually to translate them in English. And it's quite interesting that around the time that Prabhupada was born was approximately around the time where it's either the typewriter or the printing press was created. So the printing press is created. Modern technology makes it much easier to print books and by the masses. So this is all a divine arrangement, so that we can have the Bhagavatam to read and study, and we can also give the Bhagavatam to others. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur in 1936 was the year that he left this world. He gave 17 final instructions to his disciples. And the last one, number 17, was that you preach this message of Rupa and Raghunath very fearlessly. And by this, all perfection is achieved. So simply by accepting the magical gift that we're given and trying to give it to others, that's all we actually really need to do. The perfection is there in the act itself, and at the end, whenever that is, whenever Krishna is satisfied with your service, you attain all perfection. Everything, your Siddhadeha is realized, and you go back home, back to Godhead. Or if Krishna likes, he keeps you here, so you can continue spreading Rupa and Raghunath's mission all over the world. And Krishna is really tricky because he actually gives himself to people that aren't even interested in him. Out of curiosity, about a month ago, I was reading about the fossil records in the Grand Canyon. And at the very bottom of the fossil record, like at the bottom layer, somehow or another, it's called Vishnu's basement. It's spelled just like Vishnu. So even people that are studying the fossil record, they hear about Vishnu. I ordered a phone case online to protect my phone in case I drop it, and it came from a company called Zizo. This is it right here, from Tennessee, and it's called Balaji E-commerce. So just everywhere is Krishna's names, and people don't even know it. They're just getting every sound vibration. It travels around the earth. So Krishna actually tricks people by activities like this. I didn't prepare for class at all, so I don't know what else to say. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Sure.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhu. Wonderful. Uh, the verse was explaining about the energy of the Lord, how mystical it works. So you mentioned at the beginning about the story of the dream that this person had. So that reminds me also something about a dream that one lady had while I was distributing books one time, and this lady, she said